Johnny Carson was making light conversation about celebrity children's careers when he casually mentioned, "Speaking of talented kids, how's Dino Jr. doing with his Air National Guard service?" The question hung in the air for 3 seconds before Dean Martin's face completely crumbled, his hands going to cover his eyes as a sound escaped him that nobody had ever heard on television. A raw, primal sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. The audience went from laughter to horrified silence as Dean collapsed forward in the guest chair, his body shaking with grief, while Johnny sat frozen, not yet understanding that Dino Jr. had been dead for 8 months and he'd just accidentally torn open the wound that would never heal. November 28, 1987. The Tonight Show was taping its post-Thanksgiving episode, and Dean Martin had reluctantly agreed to appear after months of Frank Sinatra's pleading. It was Dean's first public appearance since Dino Jr.'s funeral in April, 8 months of isolation broken only by this favor to Frank, who'd promised Johnny that Dean was ready to come back. The audience had given Dean a standing ovation when he entered, many knowing about his loss, trying to show support through their applause. Dean had smiled and waved, but those close enough could see his eyes remain vacant, going through the motions of being Dean Martin. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a silver tie, having lost enough weight that his longtime tailor had to take everything in twice. The makeup department had worked overtime to hide the dark circles and hollow cheeks, but under the harsh studio lights, Dean looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 8 months. He sat in the guest chair with unusual stillness, the animated storyteller replaced by someone who seemed to be conserving every ounce of energy just to be present. Johnny had been briefed extensively by the producers. Don't mention the accident. Don't mention the Air National Guard. Don't mention flying. Don't mention March. Don't even mention children unless Dean brings it up first. The pre-interview had been carefully scripted to focus on Dean's early career, his music, safe territory from decades past. Johnny had his blue cards meticulously organized with approved topics. The Rat Pack's Vegas days, funny stories about Frank, the old Martin and Lewis routines. Nothing from the present, nothing that could trigger grief. The interview had started well enough. Dean told a story about Sammy Davis Jr. getting locked in a casino vault, managing a few genuine laughs from the audience. Johnny was relieved, thinking perhaps Dean was stronger than everyone feared. They discussed Dean's Christmas album from the 1960s, his favorite golf courses, anything that kept them firmly planted in safer times. Dean even managed his signature move of pretending to sip from Johnny's coffee mug, though his hand shook slightly as he set it down. "You look good, Dean," Johnny lied kindly. "It's wonderful to have you back." "It's good to be anywhere, Johnny," Dean replied, and something in his tone made Johnny glance at his cards nervously. "You know, Dean," Johnny said, shuffling to a new card, "it's interesting how many of our kids followed us into show business. My sons didn't want anything to do with television, but so many celebrity children catch the bug." He was setting up what he thought was a harmless segue into Dean's successful recording career, completely unaware he was walking into a minefield. Dean's posture changed almost imperceptibly, his shoulders tensing. "Some do," he said quietly. "It must make a father proud," Johnny continued, not catching the warning signs. "I was reading about all these second-generation entertainers. Frank Jr. with his music, Gary Crosby, and of course," Johnny glanced at his card, which had been prepared months ago by a researcher who'd included outdated information. "Speaking of talented kids, how's Dino Jr. doing with his Air National Guard service? Following the military tradition." The transformation in Dean's face was instant and devastating. His eyes widened first, as if he'd been physically struck. Then his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands started to rise toward his face, trembling violently. The audience, not understanding what was happening, remained silent, waiting for Dean to respond. "Dean," Johnny said, suddenly concerned. "Are you?" That's when the sound came. Not words, but a raw, broken wail that seemed to tear from Dean's chest. His hands covered his eyes as his shoulders began shaking with violent sobs. The microphone picked up everything: the gasping breaths, the choking sounds of a man trying and failing to control himself. Ed McMahon shot up from his desk. "Johnny," he said urgently, but Johnny was frozen, his cards scattered on the desk, his face white with growing realization. "Oh, God," Johnny whispered, the microphone catching it. "Oh, my God, Dean, I don't." Dean was bent forward in the chair now, his entire body convulsing with grief. Between sobs, words started tumbling out. "He's gone. My boy is gone. 8 months. 8 months dead." The audience gasped collectively. Several people in the front row started crying. A woman called out, "We're so sorry, Dean." But Dean couldn't hear anything over his own anguish. The sound of his crying filled the studio, raw and primal, the kind of grief that made viewers at home reach for their phones to call their own children. "My boy is dead, Johnny," Dean suddenly screamed, looking up with a face destroyed by tears. "March 21st. His phantom went into San Bernardino Mountain. They had to identify him by his teeth." The brutal details poured out uncontrolled. "My beautiful boy, 35 years old, captain in the Air Guard, everything to live for, gone. Gone." Johnny had dropped his cards completely, reaching across the desk toward Dean. "Dean, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Nobody told me." "Everyone knows," Dean sobbed. "How could you not know? It was in every paper. My son. My son." He started rocking back and forth in the chair, his arms wrapped around himself. "He was the good one, Johnny. The one who made something of himself. Not like his old man, drunk and useless. He was honorable. He served his country. And what did he get? A mountain in his face at 400 miles per hour. The audience was in chaos. People were openly weeping. Some were trying to leave, but the ushers didn't know whether to let them. Fred de Cordova was in the booth screaming into his headset, but nobody knew what to do. You couldn't cut to commercial during this. You couldn't just stop, but you couldn't let it continue either. "They wouldn't let me see him," Dean continued, his voice breaking on every word. "They said it was better to remember him as he was. But I needed to see my boy. I needed to hold him one more time. They gave me a flag instead. A flag, like that's supposed to replace my son." Doc Severinsen had put down his trumpet entirely. Several band members were crying. Ed McMahon had walked over to Johnny's desk and whispered urgently, "We have to stop this." But Dean heard him. "No," he shouted. "Let them see. Let them see what happens when you lose a child. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. Every morning I wake up and for 10 seconds I forget he's dead. And then I remember, and I die all over again." Johnny finally stood up, walking around his desk to Dean's chair. Without asking permission, he knelt beside Dean and put his arms around him. Dean collapsed against Johnny's shoulder, sobbing like a child himself, his body shaking so violently that Johnny had to hold him to keep him in the chair. "We need to stop the show," Johnny said into his lapel mic while still holding Dean. "Cut the feed, now." But the red on-air light stayed on. The director, in shock himself, had frozen. 20 million Americans were watching Dean Martin completely shatter on live television, and nobody in the control booth could move to stop it. "He called me the night before," Dean gasped into Johnny's shoulder. "Said, 'Dad, I love you. Just wanted you to know.'" Why did he say that, Johnny? Did he know? Did my boy know he was going to die? Johnny was crying now, too, his own composure completely gone. "Dean, he loved you. That's all. He just loved you. I was drunk." Dean suddenly pulled back, his face contorted with self-hatred. "He called to say he loved me and I was drunk. I barely remember the conversation. The last time I heard my son's voice, and I was 3 sheets to the wind." He started hitting himself in the chest with his fist. What kind of father? What kind of man? Johnny grabbed Dean's wrist to stop him from hurting himself. "Dean, stop, please." "I should have died instead," Dean screamed. "I'm 70 years old. I've lived my life. He was 35. He had everything ahead of him. Why couldn't God take me instead? Why?" The audience was traumatized. Several people had left, unable to watch any more. Others sat frozen, witnessing something that should never have been public. A man in the front row was praying audibly. Ed McMahon had finally walked over to the cameras himself and made a cutting motion across his throat. Finally, and mercifully, the feed cut. NBC went to a test pattern. But in the studio, Dean's breakdown continued. He fell from the chair onto his knees on the floor, Johnny going down with him, still holding him. "My boy, my boy, my boy," Dean kept repeating, rocking back and forth. "I want my boy back." Frank Sinatra suddenly appeared from the wings. He'd been watching from the green room and had run out when he saw what was happening. "Dean, come on, let me take you home," Frank said, his own voice thick with emotion. "There is no home," Dean cried. "Home was where my son visited. Home was where he grew up. There's no home anymore, Frankie. There's just empty rooms and pictures of a dead boy." The studio was in complete chaos. The audience had been asked to remain seated while Dean was helped off stage, but many were too shocked to move anyway. Johnny returned alone after 10 minutes, his suit disheveled, his eyes red, makeup streaked. He sat at his desk and just stared at nothing for a moment before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "what you just witnessed, I need to apologize. I didn't know about Dean's son. The research cards were old. I just referenced something that—" He stopped, composing himself. "Dean Martin lost his son, Captain Dean Paul Martin, Jr., in a military plane crash on March 21st of this year. I just accidentally asked him about his dead son on national television." Ed McMahon returned to his desk. "Johnny, it wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" Johnny's voice was bitter. "I'm supposed to know these things. I'm supposed to protect my guests, and I just—" He put his head in his hands. "That man is my friend, and I just destroyed him in front of America." The audience was absolutely silent. Finally, a voice called out, "It was an accident, Johnny. We all saw it was an accident." Johnny looked up. "Dean's backstage. Frank's with him." They gave him something to calm down. "He wanted me to tell you all something." Johnny's voice caught. "He said he's sorry for ruining your evening. He's sorry. That man just had his heart ripped out on national television, and he's apologizing to you." The audience erupted. "No! We love you, Dean. Nothing to apologize for." Johnny held up his hand. "We're not going to continue the show. I can't sit here and tell jokes after that. But before we go, I want to say something. Dean Martin has entertained us for 40 years. He's made us laugh, made us sing along, made us feel good. Tonight, he didn't entertain us. Tonight, he showed us what real pain looks like. And maybe that's important too. Maybe we need to see that our heroes are human, that they break, that losing a child is the worst thing that can happen to anyone." He looked directly into the camera. "If you're a parent watching this, hug your children tonight. If you've lost someone, know you're not alone. And Dean, if you're watching this somehow, we're all so very, very sorry. Dean Martin never returned to The Tonight Show after that November night. The footage was immediately sealed in NBC's vault with strict orders that it never be broadcast again. However, bootleg audio circulated among collectors, becoming known as The Night Dean Broke. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of the purest grief ever captured on television. Those who heard it said it changed how they viewed celebrity pain forever. Johnny Carson personally visited Dean at his Beverly Hills home the next day. Finding him sedated and under doctor's care, Dean's first words were another apology. Johnny stayed for 3 hours, mostly sitting in silence, occasionally holding Dean's hand when the waves of grief returned. Their friendship, paradoxically, grew stronger after that night. Johnny became one of the few people Dean would see during his final years of self-imposed isolation. The incident fundamentally changed how The Tonight Show operated. Research cards were now triple-checked and updated daily. A new position was created, Guest Welfare Coordinator, specifically to ensure no guest would ever be ambushed by their own tragedy again. Johnny instituted a mandatory pre-show briefing about any recent deaths, divorces, or traumas in a guest's life. The Dean Martin protocol became industry standard across all talk shows. Dean sent Johnny a letter 6 months later that Johnny kept in his desk until retirement. "Johnny, you didn't hurt me that night. The hurt was already there, every second of every day. You just let America see it. Maybe that was necessary. Maybe people needed to know that when you lose a child, you never recover. You just learn to breathe around the pain. Thank you for holding me when I couldn't hold myself. Your friend, Dean." When Dean died on Christmas Day 1995, Johnny was one of 6 pallbearers. At the funeral, Johnny revealed that Dean had watched a tape of that breakdown several times, saying it was the only time since Dino's death that he'd been able to fully cry. He thanked me for accidentally breaking him open," Johnny said. He said he'd been dying inside from unexpressed grief, and that night saved him from something worse. The Tonight Show received over 50,000 letters after the incident, all supporting Dean, many from parents who'd lost children. They formed an informal support network that continues today, called Dean's Parents. Bereaved mothers and fathers who understood that sometimes grief needs witnesses.